Hello and welcome back to yet another video on Total War Warhammer 3. Today we're going to be going over my personal speculation of the endless survival battles. So as you may know, I had a little Q&A session with the devs after playing Warhammer 3. It was emotional. I asked them how they were. They gave me some really cute answers.
COLONELDAMNEDERS is wondering how you're both doing.
All things considered, very well, thank you very much. How are you, Oscar?
I'm pretty good.
Anyway, moving on. I asked them about the possibility of endless survival battles. My logic was, since we have something called survival battles where you defend versus several waves, then it just seems like the next logical step that we will be able to have some battles where we defend for as long as possible, kind of like Call of Duty Zombies, but for Total War. Now, to my surprise, the devs actually said this.
I mean, yeah, we'll be talking about some of that stuff later on, but at the risk of getting in trouble, I'll say yes at some point in the future. So yes, you're right. It is a logical step. It's a thing that's very much a part that lends itself to a mode like this. So at some point, that will be a thing, I'm sure.
Who knew the devs would semi-confirm such a wild theory? So with all that in mind, I've set about theorizing how I believe this endless survival battle mode will work, maybe not when Warhammer 3 launches, but certainly at some point in its life. So we know how survival battles work so far, and it is like this, if you didn't know. You have several points that you need to capture and hold, and each point you take invites more and more powerful enemies to come and attack you. To assist in defending yourself, you can acquire resources that allow you to upgrade your units and build defenses to make a more heavily fortified position. See, it's basically COD Zombies, but a strategy game with tiers and story. So how do they go about adapting this into an endless game mode? As usual, I'm going to split this up into sections, so if you want to jump around the chapters, they are in the description. First of all, capture points. I'm thinking keeping the multiple points is a great idea, since you can acquire score over time per point you are still in control of. This means you are rewarded for taking over all of them rather than just holding the one. This also means that you'll be more powerful holding them all, since the points under enemy control give your units debuffs, so capturing them is heavily encouraged. However, I'm not sure how to allow you to capture them, as the way we did it, we had to get them in sequence and defend a wave at each one before moving on to the next. I think for a battle type like this that's endless, we want it to be more replayable, so removing the restrictions on this would work a lot better and allow players to rush the capture points for a higher score. Now, of course, capturing these points will also trigger more and stronger enemies much faster, since otherwise you could just instantly rush them and then immediately have more score. Now for the supplies. Now in the current quest battle, you earn supplies for each point captured and for each unit killed. I don't really want to change too much here, since it does work quite well, to be honest, just needs some very slight tweaks. Now, I don't think giving massive bonuses per point captured is a great idea, as it would allow people to rush and cheese quite easily. Instead, I think that gaining increased amounts passively per point captured works much better, so if you're in control of them all, then you get the most supplies possible to defend them all. I also think that gaining some supplies for every entity killed works quite nicely and similar to zombies. You also get a constant supply as you defeat enemies, and I'll tell you how I'm going to balance this later when I get to the enemies part, so don't worry about that, I have thought about it. As for costs of things, I'd rather go over that as I'm talking about each thing you pay for, so I'll leave that for now. As for your friendly units, now in Call of Duty Zombies, and you're just going to have to deal with the fact I'm going to make a lot of references since it is the closest game mode I have a lot of experience in. You start off with a crappy pistol and work up to more powerful and often ridiculous weapons. I think starting the player out with some weak start units to begin with that they can trade out or upgrade into better units would work out quite nicely to bring plenty of challenge to the early game and reduce the allure of that early rush that I mentioned. Over time, as you earn more supplies, you can call in more powerful units or choose to upgrade the units you have, like we could in the quest battle. You can also only recruit certain units when you're in control of certain amounts of points. That gives you yet another incentive to hold them all. I think setting a cap for friendly units you can have in at once is a good idea, both for performance and also for difficulty, as having like 60 units would be a bit silly. Maybe have it be 30 or something, so that you can at least have a few units in at each point. As for limiting the number of units in the summoning pool, I'm not too sure, as you would eventually run out even if you teleport them out and back in again regularly. I think having you able to recruit the whole roster when in control of all the points, and they're just a flat cost, and the more of one unit you recruit, the more expensive it becomes. So the first Tsar Guard costs 900 for example, and then the next costs 100 more, and each one after that is more and more expensive. Teleporting units out is great, and I think they should keep it, as it really does add a lot of strategy. Maybe have it so it refunds the amount of unit that's left as a percentage, so if you teleport out a 50% HP unit, then you get 50% of the base cost back. If you've upgraded the unit, then it will also take 50% of that cost and give it right back to you. So this means if you buy your first units of Sargard and then you teleport them out after you bought 6 more, you will get 50% of that base cost back, but then again you will be paying the increased rate from buying your 6th Sargard, as it were. Now all of the other upgrades and regeneration and ammo replenishing buffs can stay more or less the same, since they are pretty balanced, since units eventually hit the regen cap and need to teleport out anyway. Maybe for the ranged ammo replenishing, it might be worth increasing the cost as time goes on, since without it, they may well be able to fire forever, but with the right demons, it might be alright. That being said, these battles don't necessarily have to be limited to demons. You could have endless survival battles as any faction you want, going versus any faction you want. That would be insanely exciting. Now for the buildable defenses. Now I think that the towers work pretty much just fine for something like this. Maybe just add a few more tiers of upgrades that are much more expensive, so towers can keep up as time goes on. Maybe even give them upgrades for firing rates, explosive damage, etc., so you can keep the same tower but make it better. For the barricades, I think we can also keep them similar, but again, add a few more varieties and some upgrades to the ones we have. So the buffing monuments, maybe upgrade them to get better buffs for your units, more HP for the walls, ranged unit buffs for the platforms, and of course, more powerful traps. We also need a way to repair buildings, since they will likely take damage throughout the battle, so maybe just have like the replenishing ability we can use on the units, but for buildings, or maybe just have a cost per % of HP missing, and of course this increases over time to make it more difficult. Now finally for the enemies/waves. Now of course you can just send more and more and more enemies at once of higher tier, but one of two things is going to happen. First of all, the defender may get to the point where they can hold anything off that is a vanilla unit. Alternatively, the game will lag out from too many units on screen. So I propose another system ripped straight from, you guessed it, Call of Duty Zombies. As the game goes on longer, the units become stronger. So at the start, you start out versus regular low-tier enemy units. Then later, you run into the higher and higher tier enemy units till all you are facing is the best of the best. So for example, you start out fighting zombies, and then eventually fighting Graveguard with great weapons, or whatever overpowered vampire units you may have at that time. And then once you've reached this point, beyond that, the units start to become more powerful while still remaining the same base unit. So just give them slight buffs, like give them more HP, better fighting stats, just little tweaks that make them harder and more deadly to kill that increase over time. So say at one point you're going against all the elite units, then 10 waves later, for example, their melee and HP stats have increased by 20%. This just adds a bit of extra challenge and of course applies more pressure. This provides a steady increase in difficulty that isn't just slinging enough units to crash a supercomputer. Now, as for how we do the waves, I'm not sure and I can't really decide between the two options. You could have it be like actual waves, like COD Zombies. The round ends, then another one comes until you can't take it anymore. Now this one allows for progression and world records to be nice and clear, since you know that you got to round 40 and the enemies were so strong. But the gaps in between waves would allow you to do some cheese, and defending all the points at once on a wave-based system would just be awkward and wonky. Now the other, and I think the better option, is to just have the enemies slowly trickling in like we had already, but then also have main enemies come in waves, and taking each point for the first time it triggers even more powerful waves faster. So if you stay at the first point, the waves will progress quite slowly. If you take the second, then they'll progress a little bit faster, and then if you take all three, they'll progress even faster. This is to account for the fact that you'll be getting more supplies and more powerful units even earlier. This means you will be constantly feeling the pressure, it also means no cheesing between the rounds, and it means you can get a higher score faster if all you want to do is rush all the points. As for score, I think should be calculated among these things: how many enemies you've killed, how powerful they were, and how many points you were capturing for a certain amount of time. So say you gain 1 point per second per tower captured, and then you also gain some points per the enemies captured, you'd need to work this out per enemy and per how powerful they are. So a Bloodletter, for example, killing one entity of that would be worth 3 points, while killing a Bloodthirster, then that would be something more like 15 or 20 points, and then a Bloodthirster that's got all its stats increased by like 40%, then that is worth 50 points, for example. And then you use your time to calculate your final score. So, for example, if you got 45,000 points in 15 minutes, your total score would be something like 3,000. Whereas if you got 45,000 but it took you 30 minutes, then it'd only be 1,500, for example. These aren't the exact calculations, but I think something along these lines would make it so that there is a clear, concise leadership board, and if you want to rush and go really quickly and defeat a lot of enemies super fast, then you can do that and you'll get a better score quickly. But if you choose to take your time with it, then you can definitely do that and just get a much higher score so that when it gets divided, it rounds out to about the same. Now that concludes just about everything I can think of for the Endless Survival Battles speculation. Be sure to let me know what you think of my theories down in the comments. As soon as the dev said this, I was insanely excited. I've always loved wave-based survival, and having it in Total War is just kind of like the best of both worlds coming together, if you ask me. If you enjoyed this video at any point, then please do consider leaving it a like, it really does help out a lot. And if you want to see more content like this on Warhammer 2 and of course Warhammer 3, then be sure to consider subscribing to the channel as I upload these videos every single week. I'd like to take this time to thank all supporters of the channel, in particular Nifty Norm and Kobe Said So. You guys are absolutely insane, support me in the Unclean Ones tier, and I can't thank you enough. One more time, thank you so very much for watching, and for now, I've been Colonel Damneders, and I will see you next turn.